They laughed at her when she chose him. They mocked her, whispered behind her back, even told her she was throwing her life away. But no one saw this moment coming. This was the man she chose, the man she never abandoned. They called her foolish then, but years later, the world would call her brave. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Also hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our heartwarming stories. It's funny how sometimes the smallest moment can change the whole path of your life. It doesn't happen with fireworks and big music. It happens quietly. It happens when you're not even looking, usually right when you're having a really bad day. That's how it started for Elena. Elena wasn't the kind of person you'd notice first in a crowded room. She was comfortable being the one sitting in the corner, watching. She had kind eyes, though. They were big and brown, the kind that always looked like they held a little bit of worry, even when she was smiling. She was 32, and she worked as a junior administrator at a small but busy law firm downtown. Her life wasn't a whirlwind. It was more like a slow, steady stream. Predictable. Safe. Maybe a little too safe, if she was honest with herself. This particular Friday afternoon, her life felt less like a stream and more like a river trying to flow uphill. Elena was navigating the busiest part of the town market, the kind of place where everyone is in a rush and nobody makes eye contact. The air smelled like fresh bread, exhaust fumes, and a dozen different spices all fighting for attention. The noise was constant, a mix of car horns, vendors yelling prices, and the endless shuffle of feet. She was trying to carry 2 large plastic bins filled with her mother's old ceramic dishes. Her mom had finally decided to clear out the garage. And guess who got the job of carrying the precious cargo across town? That's right, Elena. The bins were bulky, awkward, and way too heavy. She had wrapped the plates carefully in old newspaper, but with every step she took, the paper crinkled, and she felt the terrible weight shift and sway. She was wearing a light blue dress and trainers. Her hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and a tiny bead of sweat was starting to run down her temple. "Just get to the bus stop, Elena," she muttered to herself, her voice barely a whisper in the noise. "Just 6 more blocks." It happened right by the fish stall. The pavement was uneven, a thick, cracked slab of gray concrete. Elena's foot caught the edge of it. Not a huge trip, just enough. Her body lurched forward, and her arms stretched out instinctively. The 2 heavy bins hit the ground with a sickening, plastic thud. It wasn't a crash, exactly, but it was loud enough to stop a few conversations nearby. The worst part wasn't the noise. It was the way the top lid of the second bin popped off, sending 3 of her mom's favorite hand-painted saucers tumbling out onto the grimy pavement. Elena froze. The entire world, which had been rushing past, seemed to blur into a single, embarrassing moment. She watched the saucers roll, thankfully not breaking, but stopping dangerously close to the path of a delivery scooter whizzing by. Immediately, she sank down onto her knees. Her skirt caught on the rough concrete, but she didn't care. All she could think about were the dishes. They weren't worth much money, but they were priceless to her mother. As she scrambled to scoop up the saucers, the true struggle began. The flow of people did not stop. A woman in a sharp business suit with a shoulder bag that looked brand new stepped right over Elena's outstretched hand without slowing down. A young man talking loudly into his phone actually walked around the bin but didn't even glance at Elena on the ground. A group of tourists, snapping pictures of the colorful fruit stall nearby, saw her, whispered something to each other, and then turned their backs. They weren't mean people, not really. They were just busy people. They were people focused on their own errands, their own phones, their own destination. They had things to do, and a woman struggling on the pavement was just a momentary obstacle, something to step around, not something to stop for. Elena felt her eyes prickle. It wasn't the plates, it was the feeling of being completely invisible, like a ghost in her own city. She was trying to hold the lid back on the bin with one knee while clutching the saucers to her chest. It was impossible. She felt that familiar wave of helpless frustration wash over her. "Please," she whispered, not to anyone in particular, just someone. And then, a new set of shoes stopped right beside her. They weren't expensive leather shoes or fancy running shoes. They were just simple, slightly scuffed work boots, the kind that look like they've actually done some work. Elena kept her head down, expecting the person to simply step over her, too, maybe with an annoyed sigh. But they didn't. A voice spoke, and it was the deepest, calmest voice she had ever heard cutting through the market chaos. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, like the sound of a rock skipping across a silent lake. Don't worry about the lid right now. Let's get these back in the box first, okay? Elena looked up. Standing over her was a man. He wasn't a towering figure, but he felt solid. He was wearing an ordinary denim jacket over a plain dark t-shirt, and his jeans were faded and comfortable. He looked like a man who was good at fixing things. This was Daniel. He had dark, closely cropped hair, and his face was kind of rough around the edges, like he'd spent a lot of time outside in the sun. What hit Elena the most, though, was his eyes. They were a warm hazel color, and they weren't focused on her skirt or the mess or the people watching. They were focused entirely on the problem, the dishes, and they held a confidence that felt like a lifeline. He wasn't embarrassed to be kneeling on the dainty street next to a stranger. He simply wasn't. He didn't ask if she needed help. He just started helping. He didn't touch Elena. He just gently took the 3 loose saucers from her grip, the one she was clutching like life rafts. "Hey," he said, his voice easy. "Hold the bin steady for me." He carefully placed the saucers back inside the open bin, making sure the paper wrapping was still tight. Then, before Elena could protest or even thank him, he did something incredibly smart. He didn't try to fight the lid. He simply took the one loose bin, turned it on its side, and then slid the other bin, the one she was still half sitting on, right next to it. He put his foot down firmly between the bins and held them both steady. "The lids are done for, aren't they?" Daniel asked, looking at the bent plastic edges with a small, knowing smile. It wasn't a condescending smile. It was a smile that said, "I know how frustrating this little piece of plastic is." Elena finally found her voice. It was scratchy. "Why, yes. I think so." "No worries," he said, and he straightened up, pulling a roll of packing tape from a pocket inside his denim jacket. It was the thick, clean kind that plumbers and moving guys use. It seemed like the oddest thing for a person to be carrying around, but at that exact moment, it felt like he'd produced a piece of magic. "Give me a minute," Daniel said, his movements economical and quick. He didn't waste any energy. He didn't ask for her permission. He didn't fumble. He knelt down again, pulling a generous strip of tape. With 2 precise passes, he secured the lid of the first bin, wrapping the tape around the middle so tightly that the lid stood no chance of popping off again. He did the same for the second bin. In less than 60 seconds, the messy, frustrating problem was solved. The bins were secure. Elena stayed at the tape. Then she looked up at him. "Why do you have that?" she asked, a small, involuntary giggle escaping her. It was such a strange question to ask your rescuer, but it was the only thing that came to mind. Daniel stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. He had a look of quiet amusement. "I was building some shelves for my nephew this morning," he explained, nodding toward the bus that was just pulling around the corner. "It's good tape. Never hurts to have good tape." He was a man who planned ahead, a man who was prepared for small disasters, a man who didn't just walk past. Elena slowly rose to her feet. The entire exchange had taken maybe 3 minutes, but it felt like the market had held its breath for the whole time. The noise rushed back in, but now it sounded different to her. Louder, maybe, but she felt steady. I don't know how to thank you," she managed, looking down at the now neat and manageable bins. Daniel just shrugged, that same easy confidence in his posture. He didn't puff out his chest or look around to see if anyone was watching him be a hero. He just looked at her, truly looked. "It's fine," he said. "We all need a hand sometimes, especially with ceramics. Those things are magnets for trouble." He took one of the newly secured bins and lifted it easily. He didn't wait for her to tell him where she was going. He just started walking slowly toward the end of the block, where the bus stop was located. "Looks like you're heading this way," he said over his shoulder. "Let me just get you to where you're going." Elena hurried to catch up, grabbing the second bin. The weight hadn't changed, but the burden had completely lifted. She walked beside him, a total stranger, feeling a strange mix of relief and intense curiosity. They didn't talk much on the walk. He wasn't a chatty person. He just walked with purpose, occasionally making a little path for her through the crowd with a polite, nonverbal gesture. He was a silent anchor in a sea of chaos. When they reached the bus stop, he carefully set the bin down right by the curb. "Is this you?" he asked. "Yes," Elena said, her voice stronger now. She felt a sudden, desperate urge to keep him there. "Thank you. Really." Everyone else they didn't even look. Daniel looked across the street for a moment, his hazel eyes distant. "People are in a hurry, Elena," he said, using her name naturally, though she couldn't recall telling it to him. Maybe she'd seen him before? He continued, "But being in a hurry isn't an excuse to be blind. It just takes a second to stop." That was it. That was the moment that truly sank into her. It wasn't the tape. It was the simple, profound idea that being busy doesn't mean you have to be blind. He wasn't talking about the dishes anymore. He was talking about life. She knew she had to ask. She had to know his name. "I'm Elena, by the way," she said, offering a small, grateful smile. He smiled back, a genuine, warm smile that made his eyes crinkle slightly at the corners. It was the first time she saw him smile fully, and it was like a sudden burst of sunshine. "Daniel," he replied, extending his hand. It wasn't a soft, desk job handshake. His palm was rough, his grip firm. It was the hand of a man who worked with tools, who built things, who wasn't afraid to get dirty. She felt a spark of something she couldn't name. Not excitement, but a deep, quiet recognition. "Well, Daniel," she said, holding his hand a moment longer than necessary. "I owe you a favor." He chuckled, retrieving his hand. "Just pay it forward, Elena. That's all." He checked his wrist. He wasn't wearing a watch. He just checked. He seemed to realize he was running late for something. "I have to run," he said. "Take care of those ceramic magnets." "I will," she promised, watching as he turned and walked back into the crowd. This time, when he walked away, he didn't disappear. He didn't blend in. Elena stood there by the bus stop, one hand resting on the tape Daniel had used. The market was loud again. People were still rushing past, ignoring her, focused on their phones, their errands, their lives. But now, it didn't bother her. She wasn't invisible anymore. Not because Daniel had noticed her, but because his brief act of kindness had made her feel visible again, feel worthy of being seen. She looked at the perfectly secured bins. A tiny, silly piece of packing tape. But to Elena, it felt like Daniel hadn't just taped a bin lid. He had temporarily taped up the hole of loneliness that the indifferent crowd had left in her chest. When her bus finally pulled up, she easily lifted the two bins, tucked them securely into the luggage area, and found a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away from the curb, she watched the street corner disappear. She didn't think about the awkward fall. She didn't think about the rude commuters. She thought about Daniel's hands, rough and competent. She thought about his calm voice. She thought about his simple, incredible logic. Being in a hurry isn't an excuse to be blind. That small meeting, that quick rescue, left an imprint on Elena that the years would never fade. It was a clear, sharp reminder that confidence wasn't about loudness or power. It was about the quiet certainty that you could stop what you were doing and fix a small problem for a total stranger. His kindness wasn't a grand gesture. It was an efficient, practical, and meaningful act that showed her exactly the kind of man he was. She spent the rest of the ride home with a silly smile playing on her lips. She didn't know if she would ever see Daniel again, but she knew that after today, she would look at every rushing, blind face in the crowd and remember the one man who chose to stop. She felt warm. She felt hopeful. She went from being embarrassed and frustrated to feeling a quiet, heartwarming sense of connection. Hope, after all, often starts with a single kind action. Elena couldn't stop thinking about the packing tape. That simple, strong, clear plastic wrapped around those old ceramic bins. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? That a roll of tape could become a symbol of something so much bigger. But it did. For the next few days, the memory of Daniel, his quiet competence, his rough hands, And that phrase, being in a hurry isn't an excuse to be blind, was like a little secret piece of warmth tucked into her chest. She hadn't seen him again, but the feeling lingered. The real world, of course, had its own plans. And the real world, as Elena knew well, had a lot of opinions. The first person to weigh in was Ava, Elena's best friend since high school. Ava was all energy and sharp edges. She worked in marketing, dressed impeccably, and believed that life was a ladder you had to climb quickly. They met Saturday morning at their usual tiny coffee shop, The Grind. The air was thick with the smell of roasting beans and the low rumble of weekend chatter. "So, spill," Ava said, pushing a sugar packet across the chipped wooden table. "You look distracted, like you just finished a really good book." Elena smiled, stirring her latte. She told Ava the whole story, the fall, the ignoration, the strong, silent man who fixed the problem with tape. She told it with a gentle, careful reverence. He just knew what to do, Ava, and he wasn't loud about it. Everyone else looked away, but he looked right at the problem and solved it. Ava listened intently, nodding along. "Okay, so far, so good," she said, tapping her bright pink fingernails on the table. "A solid guy, a good Samaritan. But who is he? What does he do?" Elena shrugged. "I don't know. He was wearing jeans and a denim jacket. He said he was building shelves for his nephew." Ava paused, her expression shifting slightly. The excited curiosity faded, replaced by something less generous. "Building shelves," Ava repeated, the two words sounding suddenly very small and disappointing. "So, construction. A handyman. Did he have a truck? Was he, you know?" She trailed off, not wanting to say it, but Elena knew exactly what she meant. Ava was asking about money, about future, about ambition. He had work boots, Elena supplied, her tone cooling slightly. "And the best manners I've seen all week." Ava sighed, leaning back in her seat. "Look, Elena, that's great. He sounds like a nice guy to meet in a jam. But a nice guy doesn't pay the rent in this city, does he? You're 32. You need a foundation, not a quick fix with packing tape." And then Ava lowered her voice, the coffee shop noise suddenly becoming background static. She brought up the thing Elena hadn't mentioned yet, the thing Ava had noticed immediately when Daniel had walked off. "Did you notice his leg, Lena?" Elena felt a painful clench in her stomach. "Of course, I noticed his leg. He has a limp. He was walking carefully." Carefully is one way to put it. He had a definite hitch, sweetie. It looked old, like an injury that never quite healed right. Ava took a large sip of her drink, her gaze pitying. "It's a pity. He sounds lovely, but a permanent injury, that means a physical job is going to get harder. He'll struggle, and if he struggles, you struggle." The word they were dancing around, the word that felt heavy and sharp, was disability. Ava wasn't trying to be cruel. She was trying to be realistic. But that cold, hard realism felt like a punch to Elena. They weren't seeing the kindness or the competence. They were seeing a potential burden, a limitation. He was confident, Elena insisted, her voice tight. His confidence wasn't a show. It was just there, like he knew exactly who he was. "Confidence doesn't pay the mortgage, Lena," Ava insisted, finishing the brutal lesson. "Money does. Stability does. And you know who has that? Adrian." Adrian Thompson was everything Daniel wasn't. Adrian worked in corporate law, wore suits tailored in Italy, and drove a quiet, expensive electric car. He was impeccably groomed, from his expensive haircut to his polished leather shoes. He was the definition of polished. Adrian was interested in Elena, or at least, her family and friends hoped he was. He was the obvious choice for the elegant, smart daughter of a well-respected, though not ultra-rich, family. He represented safety, status, and ease. This point was driven home the next day at Sunday dinner at her mother, Maureen's, house. Maureen was a good woman. She made a killer roast chicken and kept her house spotless. But her love came with a price tag, not a monetary one, but a social one. Maureen believed that life was about upward mobility, about finding a safe harbor. The moment Elena mentioned her market encounter, Leaving out the part about Daniel's limp, Maureen's ears perked up. "Oh, that's lovely, darling," Maureen chirped, setting a bowl of potatoes down with a heavy thud. "Such a kind young man. A true gentleman. Did he give you his card? What firm does he work for?" Elena knew this game. "He didn't give me a card, Mum. He fixes shelves. He's a handyman, maybe construction." Maureen stopped dead in her tracks, clutching the serving spoon like a weapon. The pleasant, rosy color drained from her cheeks. "Construction," she repeated, the word hanging in the air like something dirty. "Elena, please. You work in a law firm. You went to university. You can't tell me you're getting distracted by some lovely man who builds things for a living." "He was kind, Mum," Elena stated simply. "Kindness is wonderful," Maureen conceded, waving a dismissive hand. "But kindness does not cover private school fees or pension plan, does it? Kindness doesn't mean he won't be crippled by 50. You need to think long-term, Elena. This isn't a fairy tale where the pauper saves the princess. This is life." Maureen leaned across the table, her tone dropping to that serious, desperate whisper mothers use when they think they're saving you from ruin. "You went out with Adrian last month," she reminded her. "He called me just yesterday to ask about your favorite wine. That's effort, Elena. That's a man with a future. He's stable, he's ambitious, and he respects the same things we respect. His parents are lovely. He's perfect. He's also boring, Mum," Elena said, but she kept her voice low. "He talks about his stock portfolio like it's a person." Maureen gave her the look that said, "You are being childish and throwing away your future. Boring is safe, darling. Boring is steady. Exciting is unstable. Exciting means you'll be struggling to pay the bills in 10 years and resenting him for every penny you don't have." It wasn't just Ava and Maureen. Over the next week, the whispers started to multiply. A friend from the gym gently suggested that Adrian was a catch and she shouldn't waste time on distractions. A distant aunt subtly asked if the nice construction fellow was just looking for a visa. Elena and Daniel were both citizens, but the implication was clear. He was the risky outsider. The constant pressure was crushing. Everywhere she turned, people were holding up a mental checklist, and Daniel was failing every single superficial point. No university degree? Fail. Physical job? Fail. Noticeable physical injury? Major fail. Wealthy background? Nope. And Adrian passed with flying colors. Adrian was the gold standard. Adrian represented the obvious choice. Elena sat alone in her small flat one evening, a glass of water growing warm in her hand. She felt stretched thin, pulled between the magnetic memory of Daniel's simple goodness and the overwhelming gravitational pull of Adrian's secure world. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her texts. Adrian had sent her an invitation to a gallery opening, a very polished, very formal event. It promised quiet conversation, expensive wine, and a predictable evening. Safety. She looked at the message, then closed her eyes. She imagined herself standing next to Adrian in that tailored suit, smiling politely. It felt stiff. It felt like she was playing a part in a play that someone else had written for her. Then, she remembered Daniel. She pictured him kneeling on that dirty street, not worried about his expensive clothes, not worried about who was watching, just focused on the simple, practical act of making things right. She remembered the warmth of his hand and the confident surety in his voice. The difference wasn't about money. The difference was about value. Adrian valued the appearance of success. Daniel valued action and genuine help. Adrian would give her a perfect life. Daniel would give her a real life. The world was trying to tell her that love was a business contract. Her family saw Adrian as an investment. They saw Daniel as a liability. But her heart, that little, stubborn muscle in her chest, remembered the feeling of being truly seen for the first time in ages. It remembered the feeling of that packing tape. This brings us to a crucial moment in any journey, doesn't it? That point where you have to decide if you are going to listen to the loud noise of the world or the quiet truth of your heart. If this story is resonating with you and you've ever had to choose between what the world expects and what your heart truly wants, leave a comment below right now and tell us about it. Hearing your stories keeps this community strong and reminds us all that following your own path is worth it. Elena took a deep breath. She knew the logic of the world. She knew her mother was scared for her, and Ava just wanted her to be comfortable. But comfort felt cold right now. Comfort felt like a cage. She looked at Adrian's text again. She could hear the whispers of a family in her head. Adrian, obvious choice, future, stability. She then thought of Daniel's quiet assurance. The way his focus had cut through the noise. Was Daniel a risk? Yes. The world certainly saw him that way. He wasn't polished. He didn't have the right connections. He was a man with a physical hurdle in a physically demanding job. But Adrian was a risk too. A risk of living a life that was technically perfect but emotionally hollow. A risk of never feeling that genuine, deep recognition Daniel had given her in 3 short minutes. Elena made a silent vow. She wasn't going to let the well-meaning but crippling fear of her family dictate the direction of her heart. She wasn't going to choose the man who was perfect on paper just because everyone told her to. She might be making a mistake, but it would be her mistake. She would rather risk everything on a man of genuine character than settle for a man of genuine wealth. She picked up her phone. Instead of replying to Adrian's invitation, she went to her contacts list. She had found Daniel's number taped to the side of one of the ceramic bins. He'd written it neatly on a small piece of painter's tape, just in case she needed him for a follow-up repair. A practical man, always prepared. She looked at the number. The sensible part of her brain, the one trained by Maureen and Ava, screamed at her to delete it. Stop. Don't ruin your future. But the part of her that remembered the relief of that helping hand, the quiet confidence in his eyes, the simple truth of his words, that part of her won. Elena closed her eyes and smiled, a secret, determined smile. She was going to ignore the whispers. She was going to be brave. The risk felt terrifying, but the thought of seeing Daniel again felt like coming home. She was choosing hope, not safety. She was choosing substance over shine. She was ready to take the first, uncertain step toward the man everyone laughed at, because she saw the quality of his character, and that, she realized, was priceless. Her life was about to stop being a predictable stream. It was about to become a powerful, unpredictable river. The decision was made, but the fight was far from over. Choosing Daniel was only the first step. The next step was facing the world that insisted she should choose Adrian. Elena didn't waste time. The very next morning, she stared at the number she'd peeled off the side of her mother's ceramic bin. Daniel's number. She took a deep breath, the kind you take before jumping into cold water, and pressed dial. Daniel answered on the second ring, his voice just as steady and deep as she remembered, a low, comfortable sound. Daniel speaking. Hi, Daniel. It's Elena. From the market the other day. The ceramics girl. She said the last part with a little laugh, trying to sound breezy. He chuckled on the other end. The ceramic magnets lady. I remember. Are they all safe? No more runaways. The immediate ease of the conversation was astonishing. She didn't have to impress him. She didn't have to worry about saying the perfect thing. She could just be Elena. They talked for maybe 10 minutes. She didn't ask about his job or his plans. She just asked about the shelves he was building for his nephew. He talked about wood types and the satisfaction of building something strong with your own hands. He talked with a genuine passion that made her lean into the phone. He suggested they meet up. Not for a fancy dinner. Not for a polished gallery opening. There's a little place near the park called the Corner Grill, he said. They do the best, most ridiculous milkshakes in the city. How about Tuesday evening? We can talk about how dangerous packing tape is. It was simple, direct, and completely free of pretense. She immediately said yes. Their first date at the Corner Grill was perfect in its imperfection. The place was bustling, slightly loud, and smelled wonderfully of fried food and sugar. Daniel showed up wearing a clean but simple shirt and those same familiar jeans. He walked with his distinctive, careful rhythm, a subtle shift in his weight with every step. He wasn't trying to hide his limp, and he wasn't apologizing for it either. It was simply a part of him, like the confident set of his shoulders or the way he listened when she spoke. They sat in a red vinyl booth. Elena watched Daniel interact with a waitress, a young, overworked woman who looked exhausted. He was polite, friendly, and called her by the name on her badge. He asked her how her day was before he ordered. It was a tiny thing, but it was another piece of the puzzle that was Daniel. A good piece. They talked for hours. They talked about books, about terrible movies, about what makes a good city. Elena found that Daniel didn't just have opinions. He had values. He cared deeply about quality, whether it was the wood he worked with or the honesty he used with people. He didn't boast about what he had. He talked about what he did. I like building things that last, Elena, he told her, stirring his chocolate milkshake. A lot of people want cheap and fast, but I like knowing that the deck I built for a family is going to hold up for 20 years and that their kids will grow up on it. That's my legacy, not how much money I make in a year. His eyes, those warm hazel eyes, were steady and earnest. His confidence wasn't rooted in his bank account. It was rooted in his competence and his character. And that, Elena realized, was a fortress no recession could shake. When Daniel dropped her off that night, he didn't try any polished moves. He just looked at her, his expression warm and direct. I had a great time, Elena. I'd like to see you again. Soon. I'd like that too, Daniel, she whispered, feeling a flutter she hadn't felt since she was a teenager. It was real. Elena and Daniel started seeing each other regularly. Simple coffee dates, long walks in the park, helping him shop for tools for a project. She was quietly, intensely happy. But happiness, when it goes against common sense, is always loud news. She knew she couldn't keep it a secret. The first person she told was Ava, on a busy Tuesday lunch hour. So, I've been seeing someone, Elena said, trying to sound casual. Ava brightened instantly. Adrian. Oh, thank goodness. You finally saw sense. Did he take you to that French place yet? His mother goes on about it. No, Elena said, taking a deep breath. I'm seeing Daniel, the man from the market. The air around Ava seemed to freeze. Her bright, professional smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. She placed her fork down with a gentle, terrifying clink on her plate. The construction guy? Ava asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Elena, are you serious? Yes. He's wonderful. Ava, he's kind, he's honest. And he makes me feel. He makes you feel what? Lena? Noble? Like you're saving a stray puppy. Ava's voice rose slightly, drawing a quick, uncomfortable glance from the table next to them. Look, I know you have a huge heart, but you can't date based on a rescue fantasy. He has a physical injury that will get worse, not better, in his line of work. That means a struggle, Elena, a massive struggle, and you've worked too hard to climb out of your own struggle just to dive headfirst into someone else's. Ava leaned in, her eyes sharp with disappointment. This is madness. Adrian Thompson is calling your mother, is taking her out for lunch, is waiting in the wings with an apartment that has a view and a stable career, and you're choosing a man with a limp and a toolbox. People are going to think you settled. The word landed like a heavy stone. Settled. It wasn't just a criticism of Daniel. It was a criticism of her. It implied she wasn't good enough for Adrian, so she had lowered her standards. The whispers intensified when Maureen found out. Maureen didn't use the word settled. She used far more emotional weapons. She used disappointment. Elena went to her mother's house for tea, and the atmosphere was thick and cold. Maureen didn't yell. She just let out long, sorrowful sighs. I only want you to be happy, darling, Maureen said, stirring her tea, her voice trembling just enough to make Elena feel guilty. But happiness isn't just about a sweet face. It's about being safe. It's about not having to worry when the bills come. Maureen pulled out the heavy artillery. Adrian. Adrian is heartbroken, Elena. He's a wonderful, suitable man. He was willing to give you everything. A beautiful life. And you've turned him away for a lovely boy who works with his hands. I spoke to Mrs. Davies, you know, the one whose husband owns the big building company. She said that kind of work breaks a man's body after a few years. She was pitying me, Elena, pitying me because she thinks my smart daughter is throwing away her potential. Mum, Adrian is fine, but I don't love him, Elena said, her own voice becoming steady and firm, which surprised even herself. I don't even like him that much. He makes me feel like I need to be better dressed and quieter. Daniel makes me feel like I can be exactly myself. Maureen set her cup down hard. And what is exactly yourself, Elena? It's a girl who works hard and deserves stability. This isn't love, honey. This is foolish pride. You're settling for less because it feels like a rebellious choice. But when the struggle starts, that rebellious choice will feel like a heavy weight, and you'll resent him. The word settled might have been on everyone's lips, but Elena was starting to redefine it in her own mind. To the outside world, she had settled for a man with a lower income and a physical challenge. But what if they had it backward? When she was with Daniel, she didn't have to pretend to be interested in stock markets or quiet gallery openings. She didn't have to fear that if she scuffed her expensive shoes, she'd ruin the image. With Daniel, she felt settled into her own skin. She felt completely at home. Wasn't that the real meaning of the word? To be finally comfortable, anchored, and at peace. She had settled for peace, not struggle. She had settled for honesty, not polish. She had settled for character over cash. One evening, Daniel was helping her fix a wobbly old kitchen chair, a tiny, unnecessary task, but he insisted on using the right tools and getting it perfect. He knelt on the floor, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was completely focused, his careful movements a stark contrast to the quick, careless way others move through life. He looked up, saw her watching him, and grinned. Almost there. Strong enough for an elephant now. In that moment, watching this man who took pride in making things strong and durable, a wave of powerful, quiet love washed over Elena. He wasn't perfect, but he was true. He saw the value in small, necessary things. He saw her value. That night, she stood up to her own fear and the chorus of external judgment. She called Ava. Listen, Ava, I appreciate your worry, but I've made my choice. I'm with Daniel. He's the kindest, most competent, most genuine man I've ever met. And if you and Mum think I've settled, then that's your opinion, but it won't be mine. I'm choosing happiness over suitability. That's final. The phone line was silent for a long moment. Then Ava sighed, a deep, defeated sound. Okay, Lena. Okay. Just don't come crying to me when you realize the bills still need paying. Elena hung up the phone and smiled. It was a victory, a quiet one, but a victory nonetheless. The relationship with her friend might be strained, but her heart was full. She looked around her small, cozy apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs, Hayes and Daniel's, eventually. This was the foundation they would build on, not a prefab mansion purchased by Adrian's steady income, but a structure built by Daniel's steady character. They had chosen love against logic. They had chosen character over commerce. They had chosen each other, and in that choice, Elena found a powerful, heartwarming conviction. She hadn't settled at all. She had simply chosen the truth. She realized that the people whispering behind her back about settling were the ones who had settled for a life of chasing appearances. She had found the true prize. Hope and love had won the first, difficult battle. The little wedding was beautiful. It wasn't the fancy affair her mother, Maureen, had dreamed of. No expensive dresses or grand venues. It was held in a small, quiet community garden, with sunlight filtering through the leaves. Elena wore a simple cream dress, and Daniel wore his best shirt. They said their vows honestly, quietly, and firmly. They promised to stand by each other, and they truly meant it. They were in love. They were finally together. The logical part of the journey was over. Now, the real, messy part, life, began. Life as Mrs. Daniel wasn't easy. It was gritty, tiring, and constantly stressful. They rented a small, one-bedroom apartment on the far side of the city. It wasn't a bad place. It was simply old. The walls were thin, the paint was peeling in the bathroom, and the kitchen had a window that only looked out onto a brick wall. It was theirs, though, and for a while, that was enough. But love doesn't pay the electric bill, and passion doesn't fix a leaky tap. Daniel was a fantastic builder. He was honest, his quotes were fair, and his work lasted. But in the construction world, being good doesn't always mean you're busy, especially when you're an independent contractor. The work was feast or famine. One month, they'd have a huge project, a full deck or a complicated renovation, and they feel like they could finally breathe. Daniel would work 18-hour days, coming home dusty, smelling of sawdust and sweat, but his eyes would be bright. Elena would manage the books, pay the overdue bills, and they'd even splurge on takeout. The next month, the phone would be silent. "It's just slow, Daniel would say, sitting at that tiny kitchen table, his toolbox resting near his feet like a watchful pet. "People are holding back on big projects right now. We'll be fine." But they wouldn't be fine. They would start dipping into the emergency fund. They'd eat pasta every night. The heating bill would stare at them from the counter, a growing number that felt like a judgment. One chilly Tuesday morning, the old refrigerator, a massive white box that wheezed and rattled constantly, finally gave up. It just stopped. Silence. The quiet was more terrifying than the noise. Elena opened the door. The butter was soft. The milk was warm. All the week's groceries, money they desperately needed, was starting to spoil. Daniel, who had been trying to fix a stiff bathroom door hinge, came over and stared at the fridge with a look of deep, tired frustration. No, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Not now. We can't afford this, El. I just bought the materials for the Henderson job that wiped out my cash flow for the week." Elena's heart sank, but she knew this was the time to hold steady. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just looked at the spoiled food, then at her husband. "It's okay, Daniel," she said, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "We can call the landlord. Maybe he'll replace it." Daniel shook his head, leaning heavily against the doorframe. This small action, the leaning, told Elena everything. He was exhausted. "He'll take weeks, and he'll give us the cheapest replacement he can find. We need cold storage today. The meat from the freezer won't last past dinner." She watched him walk carefully back to the bedroom to find his tools. That walk, that distinctive, careful hitch, seemed heavier today. His old injury, the one that everyone had warned her about, wasn't a myth. It was a daily reality. On a day when he had to climb ladders or crouch for hours, his knee would swell, and his limp would become a painful burden. This wasn't a choice. It was a physical fact. "Honey, how is your leg today?" she asked, following him. He avoided her eyes, pulling a small wrench from his box. "It's fine. Just tight. If I can get this Henderson job done early, the check should clear by Friday. We can look at a used fridge then." Used fridge. That was the language of their marriage. No new, glossy appliances. Everything was a careful calculation, a stretch, a compromise. "But what if the check is late?" she pressed gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You know how Mr. Henderson is with the paperwork." Daniel sighed, running a hand over his face. The dust on his hand left a faint gray smear on his forehead. "Then we cross that bridge when we get to it, Elena. I'll figure something out. I always do. But right now, I need to focus on getting this job finished. Worrying about the fridge won't cool it down." That was Daniel, practical to a fault. He focused on the immediate task. But Elena saw the stress in the lines around his eyes. She saw the quiet fear she knew he wouldn't admit. He was carrying not just a toolbox, but the weight of their precarious financial situation and the added weight of his own unreliable body. The financial struggles were only half the test. The other half was the social isolation. Maureen, Elena's mother, kept her distance. She would call, but the conversations were strained. She never asked about Daniel's work. She only asked if Elena had seen Adrian lately. It was a subtle, constant reminder that Elena had failed to meet her social expectations. "We'd love to have you over for Sunday lunch, darling," Maureen said on the phone one weekend. "But Adrian's family will be here. It's a very formal thing, and I know Daniel is busy." Busy, a polite substitute for unsuitable. Ava, Elena's best friend, was even more direct. She hadn't visited the new apartment once. "Look, Lena, I just can't," Ava confessed during a short, hurried call. "It's not personal. It's just, you guys are having a moment. The struggling, romantic life. It's just not my scene right now. I'm focusing on my career." It was clear that spending time with Elena and Daniel was perceived as risky, like social quicksand. Elena realized that for her circle, Daniel wasn't just a husband. He was a living, breathing symbol of her settling. Being around them was an admission that their stable, polished lives weren't the only way to be happy. So, they chose to stay away. Elena was suddenly alone. Her comfortable, predictable social safety net was gone. She went to the grocery store that same day, feeling the sting of rejection. As she passed a cluster of women she used to know from her law firm days, she heard a voice, sharp and clear. And she mirrored the handyman. "Can you believe it? Such a waste. I heard they are struggling to pay for their car." She definitely settled. The word hit her again. This time, Elena didn't get angry. She felt a profound, quiet sadness. They weren't laughing at their hardship. They were laughing at her choice. They believed that love wasn't enough to overcome lack of money and physical limitations. She wanted to run, but she stood tall, pushing her empty cart past them. She went home, not to cry, but to sit in the quiet apartment, the humming silence of the dead fridge amplifying her loneliness. That evening, the physical challenge came home. Daniel returned from the job site late. He wasn't smelling of sawdust. He smelled of damp earth and exhaustion. He didn't come in talking about the shelves. He came in and slumped onto the sofa, his face pale and drawn. "It's a bad one, Elle," he admitted, his voice low and tight. "Had to spend most of the day digging out some old roots to sink the post. The twisting, it just seized up." He looked vulnerable then, and the sight tore at Elena's heart more than any late bill ever could. His disability wasn't a concept debated by her mother. It was a throbbing, physical reality in their living room. "Come here," she whispered, her voice full of tenderness. She knelt in front of him, gently helping him take off his work boot. His knee was visibly swollen, hot to the touch. It was a constant, daily reminder of the price he paid for the honest work he did. Elena got the old heating pad, the one with the frayed cord that they had to hold just right to make it work. She placed it over his knee. "I'm sorry, Elena," Daniel said, his eyes closed, his hand resting lightly on her head. "I know this isn't the life you pictured. I know it's hard." He was apologizing for the financial struggle, for the physical burden, for the coldness of her family. He was apologizing for the reality of their marriage. This was the test. This was a moment where Elena could, in her mind, agree with Ava and Maureen. She could think, they were right. This is too much. I settled for a beautiful soul and a difficult life. But when she looked at Daniel, his face etched with honest pain and effort, all the bitterness and loneliness dissolved. She took his rough, calloused hand, the hand that had held the packing tape, the hand that built things to last, and she kissed his knuckles. "I wouldn't trade this life for Adrian's money for 1 second. Daniel," she said, her voice clear and sure. "Do you hear me? We may not have a working fridge, and my mother may think I'm a fool, but we have this. We have trust. We have honesty. We have the best foundation any marriage could ask for." She was quiet for a moment, tracing the lines of dirt on his hand. "It is hard," she admitted, finally letting the wall down. "The isolation, the money worries, it's a constant weight. But we carry it together. You build the decks, I fight the bills. We're a team." Daniel opened his eyes and looked at her. In that moment, the exhaustion was still there, but it was mixed with profound love. "Thank you, Elle," he simply said. "Thank you for seeing past the surface." They sat together on the threadbare sofa, the ancient heating pad buzzing faintly. They talked about the fridge, not with panic, but with a plan. Daniel would look for a side job on a weekend to pay for a cheap replacement. Elena would call a few more of Daniel's old clients to drum up some work. They ended the night sharing a simple bowl of soup, sitting close in the dim light of their small kitchen. They might have been poor in money and rich in bills, but Elena knew they were the wealthiest people in the city when it came to integrity and connection. Their difficulties weren't tearing them apart. They were simply welding them together, forging their bond into something infinitely stronger and more precious than gold. This difficult beginning wasn't a punishment. It was a refining fire of their love. They were tested, they were tired, but they were victorious in the only way that mattered. They had each other. Elena leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder, listening to the steady, comforting beat of his heart. She had chosen true love, and true love, she knew, was always worth the difficulty. Life kept testing them, and the tests were rarely subtle. One rainy evening, the small job Daniel had been counting on, a quick repair for a retired teacher, got cancelled. Not because of Daniel's work, but because the teacher's roof started leaking and all her money had to go to emergency repairs. Daniel came home soaked, disappointed, and nursing a particularly angry ache in his bad knee. He sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, his old work boots leaving damp marks on the cheap laminate floor. Elena poured him a cup of hot tea, strong and sweet. "It's just another hurdle, El," he said, his voice flat. He looked beaten, not by the rain or the job loss, but by the relentless effort of staying afloat. "I'm working twice as hard as I should be, and we're still just barely paying for the gas." Elena sat across from him, resting her hand on his. His skin felt rough and cool. She didn't offer empty words about it getting better. She just met his gaze, letting him know she saw his pain. "It's not just the money, is it, Daniel?" she asked quietly. He looked away, staring at the brick wall outside their kitchen window, the same wall that had stared at her during her loneliest moments. "No," he confessed, letting out a heavy sigh that sounded like it had been holding back for years. "It's that I feel like I'm running in place. I feel like I'm wasting the ideas. I know I have good ideas, Elena. Ideas that matter." This was it. The door to the secret part of Daniel. The part everyone had dismissed. The part he himself had carefully tucked away. "Tell me about the ideas, Daniel," she urged. "Tell me what you really want to be building." He hesitated, then reached for an old, spiral-bound notebook that he kept hidden beneath his tools in the small coat closet. It wasn't the kind of notebook a builder uses for quotes. It was the kind an architect uses for dreams. The cover was worn soft, and the first few pages were water-stained. He flipped it open, and the silence in the apartment suddenly felt charged with possibility. "Before the accident, before I was just the handyman with a bad leg," Daniel began, his voice taking on a new texture, a vibrant, confident hum she hadn't heard before. "I wasn't just going to be a contractor. I was going to change the way people lived in small spaces." He ran a rough finger over a neat, technical sketch of a small, perfectly designed garden studio. "I was at college for building design," he explained. "My family didn't have money for the full architecture degree, but I was focused on the practical side, how to make a space beautiful, efficient, and honestly sustainable. I was obsessed with minimizing waste, building materials that lasted 2 lifetimes, and designing houses that fit a family perfectly, without needing to be huge mansions." He looked up at her, a fire catching in his eyes. "I had this vision, El. I wanted to start a small firm, Daniel's Design and Build. We wouldn't build cheap, quick houses. We'd build quality homes for real people. Small, smart houses. Places where the money went into the wood, the insulation, the craftsmanship, not into marble countertops and endless, empty rooms." His hands, the ones that were so good at fixing things, moved passionately as he spoke, gesturing over the intricate drawings. "I was close to getting a small business loan. I had my blueprints. And then the steel beam fell. It crushed the project almost as badly as it crushed my knee." He pointed to a large, jagged tear on one of the early sketches, a symbol of the moment his life fractured. "When the recovery took forever, and the doctors were telling me I wouldn't be able to stand on concrete for more than 4 hours a day, the bank pulled the loan. Everyone looked at me and saw a liability. They saw the cost of my medical bills, not the value of my vision. So I took the toolbox, and I took the small repair jobs, because a man has to work." The depth of his hidden ambition stunned Elena. She had known he was talented, but she hadn't known he was a visionary. The man her family had dismissed as a handyman with a limp was, in fact, an innovator who was still carrying the blueprints for a better future in his bag. He hadn't settled for construction work. He had strategically retreated to the simplest application of his skill just to survive. "But the fire is still there, isn't it?" Elena asked, her voice soft but sure. Daniel's eyes found hers. "It is. It drives me crazy sometimes. I'm spending all my time fixing other people's shoddy work when I could be building something incredible myself. But how do you start a design and build firm when you're worried about affording a working fridge?" This was a question that had kept them trapped. The question that demanded courage, not cash. Elena closed the notebook gently, but her hand rested firmly on the cover. She had spent the last few years defending Daniel's character. Now, she realized she needed to defend his potential. The people who call you a handyman, Daniel, are the same people who can't see past the paint on a wall, Elena said, her voice rising with quiet conviction. They think big ideas only come from big offices, not from a man who knows how to sink a post straight. But you're right. You're working twice as hard right now just to survive. She took a deep breath. She wasn't just his wife anymore. She was his co-pilot, his strategist, his chief advocate. We stopped running in place, she announced, her brown eyes blazing with a new focus. We don't have Adrian's money, but we have two things Adrian doesn't have: your vision and a deep understanding of what lasts. And we have me. I'm not just an administrator at a law firm. I manage contracts. I chase down invoices. I write proposals. I know how to make a case. She squeezed his hand. We're not going to try to start your full fame yet. That's too much pressure. We're going to start tiny. We're going to start with a studio. Daniel looked confused. The studio? Look at your sketches, Daniel. Look at this garden office you designed, Elena said, pointing to the drawing. Everyone wants a small, quiet, well-built space now. We're not competing with the big construction firms. We're competing with cheap sheds. We're going to specialize. We're going to build one perfect, innovative garden studio for one client. Then we take professional photos, and we use that to get the next job. Elena had already shifted from romantic supporter to fierce business partner. The fear of their financial situation was replaced by the exhilarating rush of a shared, powerful mission. I'll do the finances at night. I'll draft the proposals. You focus on the design and the build. We call ourselves Anchor Build. Because that's what you are, Daniel. An anchor. You build things that hold fast. Daniel just stayed at her, his lips parted slightly. The look on his face was one of profound relief and respect. He didn't have to carry the weight of the dream alone anymore. Anchor Build, he repeated, testing the name. I like that. I like that a lot. We'll start simple, Elena continued, her mind already buzzing with administrative details. I'll use my lunch break to research small business grants for innovation. We will be meticulously honest, Daniel. We will build the best product anyone in this city has ever seen, even if it's only a small shed. We will let the quality of your work speak louder than the whispers about your leg. She saw his confidence return, not the quiet confidence of a man fixing a broken hinge, but the strong, purposeful confidence of a visionary who was finally being seen. He stood up, his knee protesting a bit, but his posture was straight. He walked over to her side of the table and pulled her into a tight, grateful hug. You, Elena, he murmured into her hair. You are the best decision I ever made. Everyone else saw the tape and the tool belt. You saw the blueprints. Elena hugged him back, fiercely. The love they shared wasn't just emotional comfort. It was now a powerful, shared purpose. It was a partnership based on recognizing and lifting each other's true potential. They spent the rest of the evening poring over his notebook. Daniel explained the physics of the roof structure. Elena explained the necessary legal jargon for their contract template. The small, cramped apartment, with its broken fridge and peeling paint, suddenly felt like a vibrant, buzzing studio. Their poverty was still real, but now it was temporary. The dream, once hidden and fractured, was now firmly shared. Elena had officially become Daniel's biggest supporter, not just of his heart, but of his incredible, enduring vision. She had married the man everyone thought was a liability, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that she had married an asset, a builder, and a future success story. Their difficult beginning had finally paved the way for a hopeful, challenging, and profoundly united next step. The hardest part about struggling isn't the lack of money itself. It's the way the lack of money affects everything else. It makes the air in your small apartment feel heavy. It turns small disagreements into major fights. It makes your future look less like a horizon and more like a locked door. For Elena and Daniel, the pressure started to build like water behind a cracked dam. They had thrown their entire, fragile hope into the Anchor Build vision. Elena had spent weeks meticulously preparing the small business grant application. She'd made Daniel's design work look professional, weaving her administrative skills around his creative genius. They sent it off, praying that the committee would see past Daniel's limited work history and his physical limitations, and see the value of his sustainable vision. The answer arrived in a stiff, official envelope on a Tuesday. Elena opened it alone while Daniel was out on a job, fixing a leaky faucet for just $50. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly crushing. Denied. The reasons were dry and formal, insufficient collateral, high-risk operational profile due to the physical nature of the work, and the proposed niche being too specialized for general funding. The bank, seeing a handyman with an old injury, had failed to see the innovator. When Daniel came home, Elena showed him the letter. He didn't shout. He didn't break anything. He just read it slowly, then crumbled it into a tight ball. "It's okay, Elle," he said, but his voice was thin. "They only see numbers. We'll find another way." But the bad news didn't stop there. The next week brought a physical blow that wiped out their remaining financial cushion. Daniel had taken a difficult job dismantling an old shed. It was awkward, heavy work, and his knees simply gave out. Not a massive injury, but enough. He came home limping so badly he could barely get up the 2 flights of stairs to their apartment. For 3 days, he was completely grounded. No work, no income, just pain. Elena stayed home, trying to work remotely on the firm's paperwork while applying hot compresses to his knee. The lost wages meant they couldn't pay the insurance premium on Daniel's old, essential van, the vehicle that carried his tools and his business. The financial panic was suffocating. Then came the emotional blow, small but sharp, like a sliver of glass. Elena received a wedding invitation from a former colleague. It was a beautiful card, formal and distant. At the bottom was a handwritten note. "So excited to see you. We hear Adrian is doing so well. Hope he can make it." The colleague had not only assumed Elena was still with Adrian, but they had completely wiped Daniel out of her life. It was final, cold proof that to the outside world, Daniel was not just a poor choice. He was a choice so bad, he was actively being ignored out of her social narrative. The culmination of the failures, the grant rejection, Daniel's pain, the empty bank account, the profound social isolation, pushed Elena past her limit. It happened late one Thursday night. Daniel was asleep on the sofa, his bad leg propped up on a pillow, murmuring in discomfort. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills, the numbers mocking her. She looked at their cluttered, tiny living room. She saw the peeling paint, the worn rug, the stack of overdue mail. She thought about Maureen, safe in her comfortable suburban home. She thought about Ava, probably planning her next exotic vacation. And the voice started. The internal whisper of doubt, the one that used her mother's words and Ava's logic. They were right, Elena. They were absolutely right. This isn't a beautiful struggle. It's just a struggle. You chose poverty. You chose pain. You chose a life that will never get easy. You had the chance for safety, for stability, for Adrian's perfection, and you threw it away for a nice handshake and a story about packing tape. She laid her head down on the cool, scratched surface of the table, and she felt the hot, silent tears finally come. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of raw, exhausting regret. She loved Daniel, fiercely, completely, but love felt heavy when it was the only thing holding up the collapsing roof of their life. "It's not enough," she whispered into the silence, the words tasting like salt and failure. "Love isn't enough to build a life. You need money. You need security. You need health." She stood up, pacing the small space, desperate for air. She looked at Daniel, vulnerable in his sleep. She loved his character, his honesty, his good heart. But his good heart couldn't fix his bad knee, and his integrity couldn't pay the gas bill. She started to cry harder, making small, choked sounds she couldn't control. Daniel stirred. He blinked awake, instantly alert. He saw her, her face streaked with tears, her body shaking, holding a stack of bills like they were weapons. "Elle, what is it? What's wrong?" he asked, trying to sit up, wincing as he moved his leg. "Everything is wrong," Daniel, she burst out, the doubt finally surfacing, sharp and accusatory. The grant is rejected. Your leg is worse. We can't even afford the insurance on the van. I just got an invitation where they didn't even acknowledge you exist. She threw the bills onto the table. I'm scared, Daniel. I'm terrified. I had a chance for a life that wasn't this. And I chose this. I chose struggle. We're going backwards, not forwards. Was Adrian the right choice? Was he? Maybe Mum was right. Maybe I was just foolishly proud. The words hung in the air, the worst possible thing she could have said. It wasn't a questioning of his love, but a fundamental questioning of his viability. Daniel didn't get angry. He didn't defend himself with excuses. He just looked at her, his face tired but steady. I know it's hard, Elena, he said, his voice quiet, carrying the weight of his own profound disappointment. I wouldn't blame you for thinking that. I wouldn't blame you for leaving. He paused, letting the crushing silence settle. But I won't lie to you, he continued. I won't tell you it's going to be easy. We chose the life of integrity, and that path is often steeper. Adrian's life is paved with gold, but it's still pavement. It's a road everyone else is on. We're building our own road, Elle. And right now, we're standing in the mud. I'm tired of the mud, Daniel, she cried, feeling defeated. I know, he whispered, but we're still standing in it together. He didn't try to argue logic. He didn't try to promise riches. He simply reaffirmed the one thing they still had, their partnership. The next morning, the exhaustion was still there, but the storm had passed. Elena felt numb, ashamed of her outburst. Daniel was quiet, trying to stretch his leg, clearly in pain but determined to get back to work. He needed to fix a leaky pipe for a client, a small job that would just about cover the groceries. He was slow, moving with deliberate care. Elena watched him get ready, the simple act of putting on his work boots an obvious challenge. She felt the heavy cloud of guilt settle over her. She had failed to be his rock when he needed her most. Daniel finally put on his jacket. He walked over to her at the kitchen table. I'm going now, he said, kissing her forehead. I won't be late. Be careful, Daniel, she murmured. Please. Always, he replied. But before he left, he did something unexpected. He walked over to the stack of bills, the mountain of stress that had caused her breakdown, and placed a piece of paper on top of it. Don't worry about these right now. Elle, he said, tapping the paper. Look at that instead. It's small, but it's a start. Something just for you. Daniel left, and Elena stayed at the paper. It wasn't a paycheck or miracle grant. It was a beautifully drawn, hand-inked design sketch. It was small, no bigger than a postcard, and impeccably rendered. It was a design for a tiny, beautiful standing desk. The sketch showed a perfectly balanced desk designed to sit on top of a kitchen counter, something sleek, ergonomic, and highly specialized. It featured a small, hidden shelf for her laptop's power cord, and a special angle groove for her pen. It was elegant, practical, and unmistakably Daniel's anchor build style. It wasn't a shed. It wasn't a house. It was a simple, small piece of furniture. But beneath the drawing, Daniel had written a simple, powerful caption. The anchor desk, built for the world's most valuable strategist. Prototype 001. Material cost, $0. Made from scrap plywood from my last job. Next step, build it and photograph it. Future, a whole line of anchor office furniture. Elena picked up the sketch, her hands trembling. Daniel hadn't spent the night worrying about the debt. He hadn't apologized again for his choice. He had used the limited energy his painful body allowed, and the scrap materials he had, to take a small, powerful step toward the dream. He hadn't been able to fix their money problem, but he had fixed their hope problem. This small sketch was the antidote to the rejection letter, the counter-argument to the whispering critics. It was a physical representation of his uncompromising vision and his quiet genius. It was proof that the man she married didn't need $1 million to be innovative. He just needed a pencil and a purpose. Elena's tears returned, but this time, they were the hot, cleansing tears of validation. She hadn't settled for a kind handyman. She had married a tenacious, brilliant designer who refused to let pain or poverty stop him. She looked at the elegant sketch. She looked out the window at the empty street where Daniel's old van had just driven away. She realized the voices of Maureen and Ava were just noise. Daniel's design was the truth. The money was still gone. Her doubt had been terrifying. But Daniel, with that single, small step, had reminded her that their foundation was built not on cash or convenience, but on an indestructible, shared vision. Elena carefully taped the sketch to the brick wall, the same wall he always stared at, and got to work. She was going to write a pitch for the anchor desk. She was a strategist, and they were still in the mud, but now they had a blueprint for a way out. Her heart was full, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she had chosen right. Love and hope had won the day once more. The feeling after Elena's breakdown wasn't one of shame. It was one of clarity. They had hit rock bottom emotionally, and the only way left to look was up. Daniel's quiet presentation of the anchor desk sketch wasn't just a comfort, it was a call to action. The next morning, the exhaustion was gone, replaced by a fierce, driving purpose. The little apartment immediately transformed. The kitchen table, once a battleground for bills, became the headquarters for Anchor Build. Elena's day was now split into 3 parts. Her demanding administrative job, her evening role as Chief Financial Officer and Marketing Manager for Anchor Build, and her late-night role as Daniel's nurse and anchor. Daniel threw himself into the work with a relentless focus that Elena had only glimpsed before. He didn't have a proper workshop. He had the tiny, cramped corner of a borrowed, slightly leaky garage owned by an old friend. The space was cold, the lighting was bad, and he had to work slowly, constantly managing the pressure on his knee. The creation of the anchor desk became their singular focus. Daniel didn't build the prototype fast. He built it perfectly. He worked with a quiet intensity that was mesmerizing. Every joint was tight. Every piece of wood, salvaged from a previous job, was sanded until it was smooth as glass. He refused to use cheap hardware. He spent 2 days meticulously engineering the hidden cable management system Elena had requested. If we're going to sell the vision, he insisted, carefully applying a stain, it has to be better than anything they can buy in a store. It has to feel like it will last 100 years. No shortcuts. It was hard to watch. Elena would visit the garage, bringing him coffee and a sandwich, and see the fine sheen of sweat on his brow, the small wins he couldn't hide every time he had to kneel or stand quickly. His hands, though skilled, were often stiff with pain when he finished a long session. This was the quiet, back-breaking labor that the outside world never saw. They saw a handyman fixing things. Elena saw an artist creating functional architecture, working through a physical barrier that would have stopped most people completely. When the desk was finished, it was stunning. It wasn't flashy. It was elegant, strong, and deeply thoughtful. It was a physical representation of Daniel's best qualities: integrity, intelligence, and patience. Elena, despite her exhaustion, stayed up late that night. She used her phone, not a professional camera, to take a dozen detailed photos. She didn't use fancy filters. She wrote a simple, honest listing on a niche online platform for specialized furniture. Her pitch was pure Daniel, anchor desk, designed for the modern strategist, built with materials and craftsmanship meant to last. We don't build cheap, we build quality. This is the first piece from Anchor Build, created by a builder who believes that value should be in the joints, not the price tag. Then, they waited. The silence was agonizing. The bills were still due. The doubt was still a cold shadow. The first result wasn't a sudden flood of orders. It was a single email, a small ripple in their ocean of worry. The email was from a woman named Chloe in a neighboring city. She wasn't interested in the price. She was interested in the story. She was a writer who worked from home and was tired of flimsy, mass-produced furniture. Elena arranged for the delivery. Daniel, insisting on doing it himself, carefully loaded the desk into the back of his struggling van. The moment of truth came in Chloe's bright, sunny apartment. When Daniel set the desk up, Chloe didn't just look at it. She felt it. She traced the smooth, oiled grain of the wood. She tested the stability. She pulled out her laptop and tried the charging slot. "It's beautiful," Chloe said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. "It's solid. I love how simple the design is, but you can feel the quality. Most furniture now is built to fall apart, but this feels like it was built to last. Daniel just smiled, tired but radiating a quiet sense of triumph. That simple statement, built to last, was the highest compliment he could receive. Chloe didn't just pay them. She paid them immediately, and then she did something truly unexpected. She wrote a beautiful, detailed review online, focusing heavily on Daniel's passion for quality and the honesty of the company's mission. The sale of that desk, the first fruit of Anchor Build, wasn't a financial windfall. It covered the material cost, the gas for the delivery, and left them with a meager $250 profit. But that $250 profit felt like $1 million. It was proof. It was momentum. It was the first, tangible result of fighting for the dream. Armed with the profit and the positive review, Elena and Daniel got their second break. A small contract to design and build a heavy-duty, customized storage unit for a retired couple's garden shed. It was a perfect Anchor Build job, small, demanding precision, and requiring smart use of space. They called Maureen and Ava to share the good news. $250, darling? That's lovely, Maureen said, her tone pleasant, but the underlying sentiment was clear. Is that all? That's a nice little hobby, Elena, but you still need to think about long-term stability. The apartment must be so cramped with all that wood. Ava was equally dismissive, though wrapped in marketing jargon. It's a great piece of content, Lena. Good job on the social media angle. But selling one desk is not a business model. When are you guys going to land a real contract? A house? A commercial space? Something that gives you credibility? The doubt, Elena realized, wasn't going anywhere. It was a constant background hum in their lives. People couldn't shake the narrative. Daniel was a failure because he had a limp and no degree. They could only see the tiny profit. They couldn't see the massive effort. They saw the settled life, and they refused to acknowledge the rising life. But Daniel and Elena didn't care about the skepticism anymore. They had the $250, the glowing review, and the small, firm contract. They had momentum. Daniel threw himself into the garden unit. The work was physically taxing, forcing him to spend hours kneeling and lifting heavy timber. Elena watched him take pain medicine, massage his knee, and then go right back to work, his concentration unbroken. He didn't just build the storage unit. He designed a special, cantilevered shelf system that maximized the space without needing structural support from the back wall. The retired couple was stunned by the ingenuity. Daniel had spent twice as long designing the solution than he did building it, and his price was fair, reflecting his time, not just his materials. When the job was done, the couple gave him a bonus and, most importantly, told him they had several friends who needed similar clever, small-scale storage solutions. Daniel came home that day, his work clothes covered in sawdust, his face tired, but his eyes were shining with that familiar, steady light. They loved the shelves, he said, sitting down heavily at the kitchen table. They said no one else they called even suggested anything like that. Everyone else just quoted a box with a door. Elena smiled, pouring him a celebratory cup of instant coffee. That's the difference, Daniel, she said, her voice warm with pride. A handyman builds a box. Anchor Build designs a solution. They weren't rich. They were still fighting the bills. Daniel was still nursing his injury every night. But they had done it. They had risen from the ashes of doubt and financial panic, not with $1 million contract, but with the small, solid proof of Daniel's enduring genius. They sat there, looking at the small stack of cash from the job, a meager sum, but their own. They didn't need the validation of Ava's approval or Maureen's comfort. They had the validation of a satisfied customer and the undeniable quality of Daniel's work. Their love wasn't a cushion against hardship. It was the sharp, resilient tool they used to cut through it. The seed of the dream was planted, and against all logic, it was starting to grow. Hope wasn't a dream anymore. It was the foundation of their future. Anchor Build was growing, but it was a slow, painful crawl. They weren't rich, but they weren't bankrupt either. They had moved from desperation to a kind of weary stability, a routine built on early mornings, late nights, and a relentless pursuit of quality. The small success of the anchor desk had brought in 2 more small, bespoke furniture jobs, just enough to cover the overdue van insurance and buy a slightly better space heater for Daniel's garage workspace. Elena was running the administrative side like a general managing a small, essential army. She was meticulous, tracking every receipt, filing every invoice, and organizing Daniel's scattered notes into a clean, digital folder system. One wet, dreary evening, while Daniel was out picking up lumber, Elena was digitizing his ancient files. Tucked deep inside a dusty folder labeled Old Medical, she found a crumpled, faded copy of an internal incident report from the construction company Daniel used to work for, the one where the accident happened. The report was bureaucratic and cold, but a single sentence snagged her attention. It mentioned a malfunctioning hoist lock and a note from a supervisor that read, "D has been warned about internal reporting methods. See that this is contained." The sentence made the hair stand up on the back of Elena's neck. Warned about internal reporting methods. Contained? It didn't sound like a simple safety mishap. It sounded like a cover-up. When Daniel finally returned, shaking the rain from his coat, Elena was waiting for him at the kitchen table, the report spread out under the harsh kitchen light. "Daniel, we need to talk about the accident," she said, her voice quiet and serious. He stopped taking off his coat. His hazel eyes clouded instantly, reflecting a deep, familiar pain. He walked over slowly, his limp more pronounced after carrying the heavy lumber. Why are you digging that up?" he asked, his tone resistant. "It was a long time ago. A piece of steel fell. It happens on a site." "No, it doesn't just happen when you're warned about internal reporting, Daniel," Elena insisted, pushing the report toward him. "Look at this. Why were you warned? What were you reporting?" Daniel sat down heavily. He didn't touch the paper. He looked away, staring past her, back to that dark, painful day 7 years ago. The silence in the small room stretched tight, filled only with the faint drumming of the rain outside. Finally, he closed his eyes and let out a long, heavy breath, the one that carried the weight of years of injustice. "It wasn't random, Elena," he confessed, the words rough. "It was rigged. Not to kill me, but to sideline me. To shut me up." Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She felt a cold wave of shock wash over her. Daniel began to tell the story, the truth he had carried alone for so long. He had been working as a site foreman for a massive developer named Marcus Thorne, a man known in the city for his rapid growth and cutthroat methods. Daniel had been good, meticulous, and obsessed with quality. But Marcus Thorne was obsessed with profit. "We were building a huge complex of apartments," Daniel explained, his voice low and bitter. "I started noticing the shortcuts. Substandard concrete, rotted timber being covered up, safety protocols ignored. They were cutting costs so drastically the buildings were barely up to code. I flagged it with my direct supervisor, then his. I told them this was going to cost people their lives, their savings. I told them it was fraud." He paused, running his hand over his close-cropped hair. "Marcus Thorne called me into his office. He didn't shout. He just smiled. He said I was too focused on the joints and not focused enough on the quarterly earnings. He told me to sign off on the substandard work, or my career in the city was over." Daniel had refused. He couldn't compromise his integrity. He had documented everything, planning to take his findings to the City Building Commission. A few days later, on a Friday afternoon, the day before I planned to walk into the commission office, I was working under a hoist. I had secured the load myself 10 minutes earlier. I looked up, and I knew. The safety lock was unclipped. It wasn't a random failure, Elena. Someone had deliberately unsecured it while I was below. I only had time to lurch out of the way. The beam didn't hit me directly, but the edge of the load caught my leg, spinning me into the steel support. It was enough. Enough to put me in the hospital for 2 months. Enough to make my knee unstable for life. Marcus Thorne's company quickly framed it. They filed a report blaming Daniel for poor adherence to safety checks, subtly implying he was reckless or intoxicated. The cover-up was perfect. Daniel's medical bills piled up. His reputation, in the closed world of big construction, was ruined. The bank, seeing the official report and the massive medical costs, pulled his business loan instantly. The physical pain was awful, Daniel said, looking at her, his eyes glistening with the raw truth. But the betrayal, the knowledge that someone tried to hurt me for trying to do the right thing, that destroyed my belief in everything. It's why I just took the toolbox and went quiet. I couldn't fight the pain and Marcus Thorne's millions. Elena listened, her shock turning quickly into a powerful, icy-cold fury. All the whispers about Daniel being a liability, the judgment about his recklessness, the assumptions that he was a low-level worker, it had all been a lie constructed by a powerful, greedy man to protect his bottom line. She hadn't married a man who failed. She had married a man who had been attacked for his integrity. His limp wasn't a flaw. It was a wound of war sustained while fighting for what was right. All the difficulties of the last few years, the poverty, the isolation, the constant financial strain, suddenly snapped into a sharp focus. They weren't fighting bad luck. They were fighting the long shadow of Marcus Thorne's injustice. That man didn't just hurt your body, Daniel, Elena whispered, her hands gripping the table edge. He stole your future. He stole the vision you had. The moment of raw, searing pain passed, and Elena's administrative mind, the mind that processed contracts and legal documents daily, snapped into professional gear. Her purpose was no longer just about survival. It was about justice. We're going to fight this, Elena said, her voice fierce and determined. Daniel shook his head sadly. We can't, We don't have money for a lawyer. Thorne owns half the city and the legal firms in it. That's why I buried it. We have to focus on anchor build. And we will focus on anchor build, Elena stated, looking not at the crumpled report, but at the sketch of the anchor desk taped to the wall. But anchor build is our weapon, Daniel. It's our justice. She looked at him, her eyes shining with fierce conviction. Listen to me. Marcus Thorne destroyed your name and your initial business. He tried to tell the world you were reckless and your work was compromised. But what is Anchor Build doing? We're building things that last, Daniel replied, catching her gaze, a spark of understanding dawning in his eyes. Exactly, Elena emphasized. We are the antithesis of everything Thorne stands for. His buildings are cheap and quick. Our furniture and studios are honest and durable. Our success is the lawsuit, Daniel. It's the living, breathing proof that your ethics, your vision, and your uncompromising quality were right all along. She reached across the table, taking his hand, her grip firm and resolute. You don't need a fancy lawyer, Daniel. I know the basics of contract law. I know where those reports are buried. I can start digging. We will find proof that the safety protocols were ignored on that site. And we will use the success of Anchor Build to shine a light on the truth. She leaned in, her voice now a warm, comforting promise. Every single desk we sell, every studio we build, is a piece of vindication. We don't just build furniture, Daniel. We build integrity. And eventually, the world will see that your choice to be an ethical builder, the choice that cost you everything, is the reason you will succeed while men like Thorne eventually crumble. Daniel looked at his wife, the woman everyone had laughed at for settling for a man with a disability and no money. In this moment, she was his fiercest defender, his greatest advocate, and his most capable partner. She had taken his deepest pain, the betrayal, and instantly transformed it into a shared, powerful mission. The physical scar on his knee was a constant reminder of the past, but the anchored desk on the wall and the fire in Elena's eyes were the unshakable foundation of their future. Daniel squeezed her hand, a feeling of hope and profound gratitude washing over him, heavier and stronger than any wave of doubt. They were fighting a giant, but they weren't fighting alone. They were fighting with truth, integrity, and a love forged in the fires of injustice. The struggle for money and health was still real, but now it was purposeful. Love and the pursuit of justice had never been so powerfully aligned. The kitchen table wasn't just the Anchor Build headquarters. It was a nave center of their quiet, intense pursuit of justice. Elena was running on pure adrenaline and purpose. She worked all day at her law firm job, handling routine contracts for her bosses. Then, late into the night, She applied those exact same skills to the dark, painful history of Marcus Thorne. She knew how to search public databases. She knew which documents lawyers use to bury unpleasant truths. She was looking for any legal crack, any filing irregularity connected to the massive apartment complex Thorne built, the one where Daniel's accident happened. She wasn't looking for proof of the physical setup. She was looking for financial or legal cover-up, because that's where big money always leaves its fingerprints. Daniel, meanwhile, was focused entirely on building. He worked tirelessly on their small contracts, pouring every ounce of his integrity into the work. He was quieter now, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. He was building his reputation so strong that no lie from Marcus Thorne could ever touch it again. He was building their vindication, piece by piece. One night, Elena was digging through old, public domain corporate filings related to the apartment complex's original development partnership. The documents were boring, hundreds of pages of shell companies, liability transfers, and tax records. She was about to give up, her eyes burning from the screen, when she saw a name jump out. It wasn't Thorne's. It was Adrian Thompson. Adrian, the polished, wealthy, corporate lawyer. The man everyone said Elena should have married. The obvious choice. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was listed as a key legal advisor and, more damningly, the registered agent for a shell corporation that handled the liability transfer of the construction site 3 days after Daniel's accident. Adrian's firm had been the invisible hand that cleaned up the mess and ensured that Marcus Thorne's company was shielded from any personal injury liability. Elena stared at the name, her heart pounding a furious rhythm against her ribs. The shock was immediate and physical. Adrian hadn't been just an acquaintance. He had been a direct accomplice in the cover-up. He hadn't just been interested in Elena. He was interested in her circle, her suitability, and his own status within the high-end world that Marcus Thorne also occupied. Adrian's perfection wasn't just a facade. It was a carefully constructed fortress built to protect the rotten core of his ambition. He was wealthy because he was willing to trade his ethics for a massive paycheck. He was polished because he was constantly scrubbing the dirt of his clients away. Elena felt sick. All the pressure her mother and Ava had placed on her, all the judgment about settling, had been pushing her toward a man whose wealth was literally financed by the very injustice that had crippled the man she loved. She realized why Adrian had been so eager to see her after the accident, why he had been so aggressively polite. He was keeping an eye on Daniel, making sure the reckless worker stayed quiet. He wanted to marry a safe, suitable girl and secure his position, while burying the truth of his complicity. Elena didn't tell Daniel immediately. This was her fight, a final, necessary cleanup of the social and moral debris Adrian represented. She needed proof, not just suspicion. Over the next few days, she dug deeper. She found invoices and internal legal memos, public filings that had been deliberately miscategorized, that confirmed Adrian's direct role in suppressing documents related to Daniel's report of the substandard building materials. Adrian hadn't just handled the liability transfer. He had actively helped to frame Daniel by creating a paper trail that emphasized Daniel's supposed negligence while erasing any mention of the faulty equipment. Adrian Thompson, the pinnacle of social success, was a moral sore. Elena knew she had to expose this, not for public spectacle, but for the one person whose opinion had nearly broken her spirit, Ava. Ava was the representative of the logical world, the voice that insisted Elena had made a mistake. If Ava saw the truth, Elena would be truly validated. She arranged a meeting with Ava at a clean, sterile, high-end cafe near Ava's downtown office, the kind of place Adrian would frequent. Ava arrived looking sharp and impatient. She was expecting a catch-up, maybe a plea for advice. "So, how's the tiny desk business?" Ava asked, her voice laced with the usual polite skepticism. "Still doing better than Adrian's latest venture, I hope." Elena didn't rise to the bait. She was calm, cold, and utterly focused. She pulled a manila folder from her designer briefcase, a briefcase she felt worthy of carrying now, because it contained the truth, not just office memos. "Ava, I need you to look at this," Elena said, sliding the folder across the polished table. "And I need you to understand that everything you thought was safe and right, was a lie. Ava looked annoyed but opened the folder. Inside were copies of the corporate filings, the liability transfers, and the memos Elena had found, all clearly highlighting Adrian Thompson's name and firm. What is this, Lena? Adrian's firm does corporate defense. So what? He handles liability for big developers. That's how he makes his money. Look at the dates, Ava, Elena instructed, tapping one of the documents. This transfer of liability happened 3 days after Daniel's accident. And look at this specific shell company. It was designed to quietly absorb the fallout of a faulty construction site. Elena then pulled out a sheet summarizing the hidden truth. Daniel's accident wasn't random. He was reporting that Thorne's building was fraudulent, that they used cheap, dangerous materials. And Adrian's job, the job that makes him so perfect and stable, was to make sure the evidence of the fraud disappeared and that Daniel was officially blamed. Ava's face, usually so controlled, went completely white. She read the documents again, slowly, the truth sinking its teeth into her logical, monofocused brain. She was seeing the rot behind the polish. This can't be, Ava stammered, looking up, her eyes wide with horrified realization. Adrian has always been so polite, so put together. Is put together because there's a moral vacuum, Ava, Elena stated, her voice heavy with the gravity of the truth. He builds his fortune by protecting criminals and ruining good men. He was willing to cover up the injustice that permanently injured the man I love, all for a massive retainer. Elena looked directly into her friend's eyes. You told me I was foolish for choosing a man with integrity over a man with wealth. You told me I settled. Adrian's wealth is rotten, Ava. His perfect, polished life is a lie. Daniel's life is hard and messy, but it's built on a foundation of unshakable truth. Tell me now, which one of us actually settled? Ava slumped back in her chair. The fight was gone. The judgment was gone. Her disbelief finally gave way to a sickening, profound shame. Not for Elena, but for herself and the values she had been championing. Oh, Lena, Ava whispered, genuinely heartbroken. You were right. God, you were right about him. All that status, all that polish, it was a cover. Daniel, he's a hero, isn't he? He was fighting the good fight and Adrian helped crush him. The weight of years of judgment, ridicule, and self-doubt instantly lifted from Elena's shoulders. This was a moment of ultimate validation. It wasn't about money. It was about moral vision. Adrian had represented the logical, safe choice that would have chained her to corruption. Daniel represented the risky choice that was anchored in honor. Ava reached across the table, not to criticize, but to touch Elena's hand, a gesture of profound respect. I owe you an apology, Lena. I was so blind. I focused on the wrong things. I'm so sorry. Elena smiled, a slow, deep smile that came from her very soul. It's okay, Ava. You just saw the surface. Everyone did. But that's the difference between Daniel and Adrian. Adrian's surface is his entire being. Daniel's surface is just dust and sweat, but the core is unbreakable. That night, Elena went home to their small, cramped apartment. Daniel was asleep on the sofa, exhausted from a long day, his anchor desk sketch still proudly taped to the wall. She sat beside him, gently stroking his hair, her heart overflowing with a quiet, fierce pride. She didn't wake him to tell him about Adrian's corruption yet. That was a fight they would share, but she needed to gather more ammunition. Instead, she just looked at her sleeping husband, her love for him multiplied tenfold by the knowledge that he was not just kind and brave, but a true warrior for integrity who had been attacked for his goodness. The world had laughed at her choice of husband, but the perfect suitor had just been exposed as a hollow sham. Elena had chosen truth over lies, character over cash, and the real victory wasn't the document she held in her hand, but the beautiful, honest, true heart sleeping right beside her. She had won. Love and integrity always win in the end. Anchor Build was no longer just a dream. It was a reality forged in scrap wood, late nights, and the fierce devotion of two people. They worked with a quiet, dual purpose. By day, Daniel built with meticulous care and Elena managed the administrative fortress. By night, Elena poured over. old legal filings, looking for the next piece of evidence against Marcus Thorne, the man who had tried to erase Daniel's future. Their motto was silent but powerful: quality for success, truth for justice. Their reputation, though limited to a small circle, was sterling. Daniel didn't just build what the client asked for. He built what the client needed, often finding innovative solutions that saved them time or money in the long run. His work wasn't fast, but it was faultless. People paid a premium for anchor build because they paid for honesty and durability. It was this uncompromising quality that led to their first real breakthrough. Daniel won a contract to design and build a micro-studio for an urban gardening magazine editor named Sarah. Sarah was known for her discerning taste and her commitment to sustainability. She wanted a tiny, custom-built space in her cramped city garden where she could film tutorials and write, a space that was both beautiful and completely off-grid. This was Daniel's chance to showcase his true genius, the vision he had carried in his notebook for years. He threw himself into the project. He designed a tiny studio that was a masterpiece of efficiency, featuring a solar roof panel he negotiated cheap, a rainwater collection system, and custom, space-saving furniture he built right into the walls. Because of his persistent knee pain, the work took him longer than a two-man team, forcing him to rely on ingenious pulley systems and long, slow sessions of precise work. But he wouldn't compromise. He built the foundation stronger than necessary, used reclaimed, high-quality wood, and ensured every joint was perfect. Sarah, the editor, was fascinated by Daniel. She watched him work, noticing the stark contrast between his slow, careful movements and the dazzling speed of his mind. She saw the pride in his eyes when he explained the science behind the thermal efficiency, and she saw the sheer physical effort it cost him to carry a heavy sheet of plywood. When the studio was finally finished, it wasn't just a shed. It was a tiny, beautiful piece of architectural philosophy. Sarah was overwhelmed. She didn't just pay Daniel his final invoice. She told him, with wide, genuine eyes, that his work wasn't just a successful build. It was a story. "Daniel," she said, standing in the middle of a new, sunlit studio, "your integrity shines through every piece of wood hay. In your story, the fact that you have this level of dedication despite all the hurdles, that needs to be told. The world needs to know that real quality and true innovation come from people like you, not from massive corporations cutting corners." The breakthrough was swift and unexpected. Sarah decided to dedicate the feature article of her magazine, Urban Roots, not just to her new studio, but to Daniel and Anchorbuild. The day the magazine hit the stands felt surreal. Elena was running an errand during her lunch hour when she saw it. There, on the glossy cover of Urban Roots, beneath the headline, "The Architecture of Integrity," was a stunning photo of Daniel's microstudio. Inside was a full-page spread. The pictures were beautiful, showing off the ingenious solutions Daniel had engineered. But it was a writing that made Elena's heart swell with pride. The article didn't just praise his talent, it praised his character. It spoke of the necessity of quality in a world of quick fixes, and it mentioned Daniel's previous setback in the construction world, vaguely enough not to trigger a lawsuit from Thorne, but clearly enough to convey injustice. It highlighted his quiet perseverance and his philosophy that Anchorbuild was about building things that were stronger than the temptation to compromise. And there was a large, half-page portrait of Daniel. He wasn't shown working. He was shown standing next to his finished studio, hands crossed, his face filled with quiet, confident dignity. His limp was invisible in the photo, but the strength of his character was undeniable. Elena bought 5 copies. Her hands were shaking. This was it. This was the first taste of respect. Not pity, not patronizing praise, but genuine, public acknowledgement of his talent and his moral stance. The magazine, targeting urban professionals and designers, circulated directly among the very people who had once scoffed at Elena's choice. The shift was immediate, subtle, and profound. Later that week, while Elena and Daniel were having a rare lunch at a busy downtown deli, an old colleague of Elena's walked up to their table. This was a man who, a year ago, would have stepped around Daniel to talk only to Elena about Adrian. Now, he approached Daniel directly. "Daniel, right? From Anchorbuild," the colleague asked, his voice respectful, almost deferential. I just saw the Urban Roots feature. Man, that studio design is incredible. The shelf system? Genius. We're redoing our firm's annex. I heard you do bespoke work. Could I get your card? Daniel, always quiet and steady, simply smiled and handed him a card. The colleague wasn't asking about his health, his money, or his future. He was asking about his talent. Elena watched the interaction, feeling a quiet, fierce satisfaction. The judgment was replaced by admiration. The man who was once invisible was now sought after. The ridicule had turned into respect. Elena called Maureen that evening. She didn't mention the magazine right away. Anchor Build landed a huge compliment today. Mum, Elena said, keeping her tone light. Maureen was cautious. Oh, did that little furniture project work out? That's nice, dear. It did better than work out, Mum. Daniel was featured in Urban Roots. They called him an innovator and dedicated 4 pages to his design philosophy. The silence on Maureen's end was long and thick. Elena could almost hear her mother's entire worldview shifting. The gardening magazine. Maureen finally said, a tremor of genuine awe in her voice. But that's a very prestigious publication, Elena. It's not just a local paper. They featured him. They featured his integrity. Mum, Elena corrected gently. Well, Maureen sputtered, trying to regain control. That is remarkable, darling. I always knew he was talented. He was always so good with his hands. Elena didn't point out the hypocrisy. She didn't need to. The admission of talent was the victory. The ultimate validation came from Ava. Ava didn't call. She showed up at their apartment, looking slightly flustered, holding a rolled-up copy of the magazine. I saw it, Ava said, tossing the magazine onto the kitchen table, the Anchor Build headquarters. I read the whole thing. Elena, I owe you, Daniel, a massive, ridiculous apology. I was completely wrong. That studio is incredible. It's genius. And his built a movement, not just a business. Ava looked at Daniel, who was quietly reviewing blueprints. You never stopped, did you, Daniel? All that time, everyone thought you settled, but you were just building the best comeback story the city has ever seen. Daniel looked up, his face breaking into a rare, genuine smile. I was just building what lasts, Ava. I had a good anchor. He nodded towards Elena. Elena felt a lump form in her throat. The years of doubt, the cruel whispers, the financial fear, it all melted away in that moment of shared respect. Later that night, after Ava left, Elena and Daniel sat side by side, flipping through the glossy pages. They were still in the small apartment. The fridge was still secondhand. The bills were still present. But they had the validation. You see, Daniel murmured, wrapping his arm around her. They laughed at your choice because they only saw the surface. They saw the struggle and the injury. They only respected the polished lies of men like Adrian. He squeezed her gently. But we proved them wrong. We proved that integrity is the strongest foundation any person, or any business, can have. I wouldn't trade this honest recognition, for all the safe perfection in the world. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, looking at the picture of the microstudio. I never settled, Daniel, she whispered, her voice filled with quiet triumph. I simply chose a man with an unbreakable core. And now, the world is finally starting to see it. The first taste of respect was sweet. It was not the finish line, but it was the profound proof that their difficult, honest journey had been right all along. Hope had evolved into manifest success. The magazine feature wasn't just good marketing. It was a cultural shockwave in Elena's small social sphere. The glossy pages of Urban Roots had done what years of a patient, quiet insistence could not. It changed the narrative. Anchor Build was busy. The phone now rang constantly with inquiries, many of them from the very professional circles that Elena had once belonged to. Daniel, once the handyman, was now the visionary designer. Elena's own life shifted dramatically. At work, her colleagues treated her with new respect. She was no longer the girl who had foolishly married beneath her. She was the partner of a rising star, the administrative powerhouse behind a company built on integrity. They saw her loyalty not as blind devotion, but as uncanny wisdom. She had backed the right horse, not the one with the biggest stable, but the one with the strongest heart. But the true test of her vindication lay in the hands of her mother, Maureen. Maureen had moved past denial and was stuck in a state of stunned, prideful confusion. She talked about the magazine constantly, but she still hadn't apologized for her years of doubt. The breaking point came at a small, elegant retirement dinner for an acquaintance from Maureen's bridge club. Elena and Daniel attended, dressed in their best. Daniel in a sharp, simple suit Elena had convinced him to buy, and Elena in a dress that shimmered with quiet confidence. At the dinner, a prominent local developer, not Marcus Thorne, but a competitor, approached Daniel. "Mr. Daniel, I saw your piece in Urban Roots," the developer said, shaking Daniel's hand with genuine firmness. "The structural integrity of that micro-studio, brilliant. I've been looking for a designer with that kind of uncompromising quality. Frankly, half the new builds in this city are ticking time bombs, shortcuts everywhere. I'd trust you to build my mother's house." The developer spoke with genuine admiration, entirely oblivious to the fact that Daniel was the very man whose career had been crippled by those same shortcuts. Maureen was standing close by, and she heard the entire exchange. She heard the words uncompromising quality and "I'd trust you." It was the opposite of everything she had feared. She watched as Daniel, humble and steady, spoke knowledgeably about building materials and design ethics. She watched Elena stand beside him, her face glowing with quiet pride, not needing to say a word. Maureen saw, for the first time, the true worth of the man her daughter had chosen, measured not by his bank balance, but by the weight of his reputation. Later that evening, Maureen cornered Elena in the quiet coat check area. Her face was pale, her expression stripped of its usual social polish. "Elena," she began, her voice cracking slightly, "I need to talk to you. I can't let this go on." Elena turned, meeting her mother's eyes calmly. She didn't look triumphant or superior. She looked sad for the years of lost closeness. "What is it, Mum?" "Tonight," Maureen said, shaking her head slowly. "I heard him. The way that developer spoke to him. The sheer respect. It wasn't about money, Elena. It was about trust. And that man, Adrian, I heard that his firm is losing clients. Whispers of shady practices. Things collapsing. They are saying he focused on speed, not ethics." Maureen's eyes welled up with genuine, profound tears. She hadn't just been proven wrong. She had been proven wrong by the moral universe. "I was so scared, darling," she whispered, reaching out to clutch Elena's hands. "I was so scared that he would ruin your future. That his injury would make you poor. That everyone would pity you. I was blind, Elena. I was utterly blind." She lowered her voice, the apology complete and total. "I am so sorry. I mocked your loyalty. I pushed you towards a cold, heartless man because I valued appearances and safety over integrity. You didn't choose blindly. You chose wisely. You chose the strong man, and I chose the polished shell. Please, my darling girl, can you forgive me?" The weight of years of judgment, of the constant, subtle pressure, finally broke. Elena didn't hesitate. She hugged her mother tightly. "There's nothing to forgive, Mum," Elena whispered into her ear, the warmth of forgiveness flowing between them. "You were scared for me, but Daniel taught me that what looks safe often hides the most danger, and what looks like struggle often holds the deepest truth. My loyalty wasn't blind, Mum. It was moral wisdom. It was choosing character." The reconciliation was complete. Maureen finally saw that her daughter hadn't settled for less. She had settled for more truth, more courage, more heart. With Maureen's support reclaimed, the final layers of social isolation peeled away. Ava, who was already convinced of Daniel's brilliance after the Adrian revelation, became a vocal champion for Anchor Build. "Remember how everyone used to say you settled?" Ava asked Elena during a phone call, laughing with genuine affection. "Now, the word around my office is that Adrian's career is imploding. Bad reputation, lawsuits coming out about his old clients. And you're the girl who saw the future. They aren't laughing anymore, Lena. They're asking you for advice. They want to know your secret. The former mockers, the colleagues, the distant cousins, the acquaintances who had treated her with pity, now sought Elena out. At social events, Daniel was now the magnet. Elena watched, deeply satisfied, as old law firm acquaintances who had once made subtle, cruel jokes about Daniel's limp now listened intently as he discussed sustainable building practices. They didn't see the injury, they saw the genius. And they treated Elena with a new, quiet respect. They saw the strength it took to resist the pressure, to stand by the man everyone called a liability, and to champion a dream built on ethics. Elena handled the vindication with grace. She wasn't arrogant. She didn't rub their noses in their past mistakes. She was simply herself, kind, focused, and utterly devoted to her husband and their mission. The greatest victory wasn't the increase in their bank account or the volume of new business. It was the simple fact that the whispers of settled had been replaced by the quiet acknowledgement of wise. Elena was vindicated not because Daniel had become wealthy, though success was certainly following, but because she had been proven right about the inherent, non-monetary value of integrity. One evening, after returning from a successful dinner with a new client, Daniel was massaging his knee, a ritual that would likely be a part of their life forever. "You know, Daniel said, looking up at her with his deep, honest eyes. "I always thought the hardest part of the accident was the physical pain and the money. But it was the feeling that I was alone, and that I dragged you down with me. That I made you the focus of pity." Elena sat beside him, taking his calloused hand. "You never dragged me down, Daniel. You lifted me up. You made me look past the shine and see the substance. They mocked me for my loyalty, but loyalty to the truth is the strongest thing we have." She smiled, resting her head on his broad shoulder. "We didn't just survive the ridicule. We used it as fuel. We proved that if you choose character and build with integrity, no amount of outward pressure can ever collapse your life." The feeling was complete. Respect had replaced ridicule, and wisdom had triumphed over appearance. Elena's heart was full, and her loyalty, once questioned, was now their most profound shared strength. The arduous journey had been worth every painful step. Anchor Build was successful now. The quality of Daniel's work had ensured that. They had a small team, a real workshop, and a waiting list of clients willing to pay a premium for the anchor guarantee of integrity. They were no longer worrying about overdue bills. They were investing in better tools and planning their first down payment on a small house. The whispers of settled were long gone, replaced by the murmurs of genius. But Daniel still carried one final, invisible weight, the sense that his physical limitations defined his reach. He was a success in his small, chosen world, but he hadn't yet stood on the grand stage that men like Adrian and Marcus Thorne commanded. That final challenge arrived in the form of an invitation. Due to the publicity from urban roots and the reputation he had quietly built, Daniel was asked to be a keynote speaker at the National Sustainable Design Summit, the preeminent conference for architects and builders committed to ethical, long-lasting construction. This was the biggest stage of his life. The invitation terrified him. It wasn't the thousands of people in the audience that unnerved him. It was the 200 feet of polished stage he would have to walk across with his pronounced, careful gait. He knew the crowd would be judging the man before they heard the idea. "I can't, he confessed to Elena the week before the event, running his hand over his tired face. "It's a huge hall. I'll be up there, exposed. They'll see the limp, and they'll see the history. They'll think, what business does this damaged man have telling us how to build the future?" Elena sat next to him, steady and calm. "They'll think that if you let them, Daniel. But you don't talk about your injury. You talk about your vision. And your vision is better because of your injury. It taught you what true integrity and support mean." They spent days preparing. Daniel didn't write a formal speech. Instead, he worked on the blueprint for his biggest idea, an idea born directly out of his struggle. He wasn't going to talk about old work. He was going to unveil the future of Anchor Build. He was going to unveil the Anchor Access Module, a sustainable, modular housing unit designed from the ground up to be universally accessible, beautiful, and affordable. It was designed to function perfectly, not just for someone young and able-bodied, but for people with physical challenges, chronic pain, or limited mobility. His own daily struggle had given him the insight to design a house that was smarter, kinder, and more functional than anything being built by massive, indifferent firms. It's the opposite of Thorne's cheap, fraudulent apartment complex, Daniel told Elena, his eyes shining with purpose. It's honest, it's durable, and it's built to support life, not just shelter it. The day of the summit arrived, huge and intimidating. The hall was vast, filled with thousands of industry professionals, architects in tailored suits, developers with expensive watches, critics, and investors. The air was thick with the scent of ambition and money. Elena sat in the front row, wearing her strongest suit of armor, her complete, unshakable faith in Daniel. When Daniel's name was announced, the applause was polite but reserved. Daniel walked onto the stage. The walk was slow, deliberate, a subtle shift in weight with every step. The huge spotlight made his limp immediately visible. A heavy silence fell over the room. For a brief, agonizing moment, Elena felt the old whispers return, the judgmental silence that had always judged the package before the contents. Daniel reached the podium. He placed his hands on the smooth wood, took a deep breath, and looked out at the sea of faces. He didn't use notes. He didn't start with a joke. He started with the truth. "Thank you," Daniel began, his voice clear and resonant, amplified to fill the massive hall. "I'm not here today because I went to the right schools. I'm here because I built things right." He paused, letting that simple statement hang in the air. "When I first started building, I thought quality was about the strongest beam and the best material. I was wrong. Quality is about trust. It's about building something that will hold a family when life hits them hard." He shifted slightly, leaning into the podium, his posture acknowledging his injury without dwelling on it. "Years ago, I was permanently injured in an accident. That moment cost me my health, my savings, and my reputation. It cost me my chance to build the future I had planned. Everyone looked at me and saw a liability, a man who had failed." The room was absolutely silent. Daniel had addressed the elephant in the room, his disability, his lack of status, head-on, with unflinching honesty. "But what that struggle gave me," Daniel continued, his voice rising with conviction, "was a perspective none of the luxury developers in this city possess. It taught me that most homes are designed for people who will never be tested. They are designed for a perfect world that doesn't exist." He nodded to a technician, and the huge screen behind him lit up, displaying the elegant, detailed blueprints of his new design, the Anchor Access Module. "I call this the Anchor Access Module. It is a home that is universally designed for every stage of life. The kitchen counters adjust. The bathroom is seamless. Every space is maximized. Why? Because after 7 years of fighting for every step, I learned that a home shouldn't be another source of struggle. It should be the ultimate source of support." Daniel's words flowed with the passion of a man who had not just designed a house, but designed a philosophy. He explained the ingenious modular system, the self-adjusting features, and the ethical supply chain. "My injury did not make me a liability," Daniel concluded, his voice ringing with triumph. "It made me a better builder. It gave me the insight to design true support and true integrity into every joint. I chose to turn my greatest challenge into my greatest strength. And that is the foundation of Anchor Build." The silence held for a moment, and then the applause started, not polite, reserved clapping, but a massive, roaring standing ovation that swept through the entire hall. The audience saw the design's genius, felt the conviction in his voice, and recognized the profound truth of his struggle. He hadn't asked for pity. He had commanded respect by turning his perceived weakness into the core of his innovation. Industry leaders rushed the stage, not with condolences, but with offers of partnership. They saw a man whose integrity was forged in fire, and whose ideas were smarter, better, and more human than anyone else's. Later that evening, in a quiet hotel room, the exhaustion finally hit Daniel. He sat on the edge of the bed, massaging his weary knee. Elena sat beside him, tears of pride streaming down her face. "You did it, Daniel," she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "You showed them all. You didn't just give a speech, you gave them your truth. You stood up there, against all the odds they had thrown at you, and you won. Daniel smiled, a tired but profoundly satisfied smile. I wasn't scared up there, Elle. Not after the first minute. Because I wasn't selling my product. I was selling the one thing Marcus Thorne and Adrian Thompson couldn't touch, my integrity. And I knew you were right there, holding the line. He looked at her, his hazel eyes clear and full of love. Everyone told you I had no future because of my disability. But tonight, my disability became the very reason I stand a chance at changing the future. Against all odds, we proved that character and conviction will always prevail over cynicism and compromise. Elena leaned her head against his. The victory was complete. They had earned the world's respect, not by becoming wealthy, but by refusing to compromise their truth. The man everyone called a liability had accomplished something extraordinary, transforming his weakness into the bedrock of his greatest success. The National Sustainable Design Summit had been Daniel's public moment of triumph, transforming him overnight from a humble contractor into a respected voice in ethical design. The feature on the Anchor Access module, the housing unit designed with universal accessibility at its core, had gone viral within the industry. Invitations poured in, partnerships, design commissions, even a small academic fellowship. But the final, deepest layer of their vindication was not about the contracts or the praise of strangers. It was about the applause of the critics. It was about the people who had judged Elena for choosing love against logic, finally standing to honor the wisdom of her heart. The summit's closing gala was held in the city's grandest hall, the very kind of polished, expensive venue that had always represented the distant, inaccessible world of Adrian Thompson and Marcus Thorne. Elena and Daniel were guests of honor. Daniel was still quiet, steady, and humble, but he moved through the crowd with the assured confidence of a man who knew his value. Elena, wearing a simple but elegant dress, moved beside him, radiating a quiet, fierce pride. As they circulated, Elena noticed the subtle, profound shift in the social dynamic. The women who had once angled to introduce her to wealthy bachelors now angled to introduce their husbands to Daniel. The lawyers and investors who had subtly ignored Daniel's existence now sought his counsel on ethical sourcing and long-term value. Then, Elena spotted the two people who represented the voice of her past doubt, Maureen and Ava. Maureen, having shed her fear and shame, was now Daniel's proudest advocate, hovering near him and sharing the story of the Anchor Access module with anyone who listened. But it was Ava, the voice of pure, pragmatic logic, who provided the clearest mirror to Elena's vindication. Ava approached, her expensive clothes and sharp expression softening with genuine warmth. I just saw Mr. Thompson's old boss, Marcus Thorne, over by the bar, Ava whispered to Elena. He's looking green. He's hearing about the massive contracts Daniel is getting. He's seeing the design world embrace the man he tried to destroy. And he knows, Elena, that your success is rooted in the truth that ruined him. It's not success that bothers him, Ava, Elena replied, watching Thorne's retreating figure. It's the integrity. It's the fact that quality won over his corruption. The climax of the evening was the presentation of the Golden Compass Award, an honor given to an industry figure whose work demonstrates exceptional moral and ethical leadership. Elena and Daniel were sitting at the main table, hand in hand, when the presenter announced the winner. This year's recipient, the elegant presenter announced, his voice ringing with conviction, is a man who has shown us that the greatest designs are those rooted in the greatest empathy. A man who turned a personal hardship into a blueprint for universal support. A man who reminded our entire industry that quality is a moral choice, not a material cost. He paused, and the words echoed perfectly the core of Daniel's philosophy. The Golden Compass Award goes to the visionary behind Anchor Build, Daniel. The hall erupted. As Daniel rose, his careful gait bringing him to the stage, the applause intensified into a standing ovation. But this was not just any applause. This was the final, profound sound of his vindication. Elena stood, tears blurring her vision, watching the man she loved receive the respect he had earned 100 times over. She looked out at the audience, and there, she saw the faces of the critics, her past peers, former colleagues, and distant acquaintances, all on their feet, clapping for Daniel. They weren't applauding his money, which was still modest compared to the tycoons in the room. They weren't applauding his health. They were applauding his unbreakable character. The ovation was a confession. It was a collective admission that they had all judged wrongly, that they had valued the fragile scaffolding of status over the solid, unmoving foundation of integrity. Daniel reached the podium. He took the award, a heavy, beautiful golden compass, and looked out at the room. His eyes found Elena's, and in that gaze, their entire journey was reflected. The vegetable market, the broken fridge, the years of silent struggle, the fear, the doubt, and the quiet research into Marcus Thorne's corrupt past. He didn't give a long speech. He simply held up the compass. "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice husky with emotion. "When I lost my ability to move freely, I thought I lost my chance to build. But my wife, Elena, saw the blueprint for this moment before I did. She saw the value in me when everyone else saw a liability. She taught me that the only anchor you need in this life is integrity." He looked directly at Elena, a love so deep it silenced the massive room. "This award is for my wife, Elena," he finished. "She chose character over cash, and she backed the right design. She taught us all that if you build your life on honesty, the applause will always find you." Daniel stepped away from the microphone, and the entire hall, a room full of powerful, influential people, turned their attention to Elena and gave her a second, separate, and even louder standing ovation. This was Elena's vindication. The applause was for her loyalty, for her moral sight, for her courage to love against all logic. It was the sound of every whisper of settled being drowned out by the thunder of respect. Later, as they stood together, surrounded by people eager to praise them, Daniel gently guided her to a quiet corner. "We did it, Elle," he murmured, handing her the heavy golden compass. "We won the big one. Not the money, not the prestige. The applause." They finally saw. Elena touched the golden compass, then traced the strong, honest lines of Daniel's face. They saw the truth. "Daniel," she said, her voice full of peace. "And the truth is always the strongest foundation." Their triumph was complete. They had earned the world's respect, but more importantly, they had built a life on an unshakable, honest love. The critics were silenced, not by their failure, but by the undeniable, brilliant success of their integrity. 2 decades passed. The small, rented apartment with the brick wall and the unreliable fridge was a distant memory, a foundational myth whispered with fondness. Anchor Build was no longer a small, bespoke firm. It was a national name, synonymous with sustainable, accessible, and ethical construction. Daniel, now a respected leader in the industry, still built things with his own hands, his focus still on integrity over profit. His limp was a non-issue, viewed not as a disability, but as the visible scar of an uncompromising moral battle. Elena, his chief strategist, had expanded her role, running the Anchor Build Foundation, which mentored small, ethical builders and funded universal access projects. Their most profound legacy, however, was not measured in square footage or company value, but in the lives they touched, beginning with their 2 daughters, Clara and Phoebe. Clara, the elder, inherited Daniel's meticulous design mind and his quiet hands. Phoebe, the younger, had Elena's sharp administrative competence and her unshakable moral compass. They didn't hear the story of their parents' early years as a fairy tale. They heard it as a parable of faith and resilience. They grew up in a home built on anchor principles, sturdy, honest, and filled with light, designed by Daniel to accommodate all stages of life. The kitchen table where bills were once fought was now the table where family dreams were sketched. One evening, Clara, who was studying architecture, was preparing a thesis on ethical material sourcing. She looked at her parents, both still working late, side by side, just as they had done 20 years prior. "Dad," Clara asked, pencil in hand, "when you were starting out, and everything was stacked against you, no money, the accident, Marcus Thorne trying to crush you, did you ever look at Mom and regret the choice? Did you wish you hadn't put her through that struggle?" Daniel paused, running his hand over a worn piece of reclaimed wood. He looked across at Elena, whose eyes were soft with understanding. "Regret?" Daniel asked, shaking his head. "The day I married your mother was the only day I truly felt safe, Clara. Your mother didn't just choose me. She chose the truth. She taught me that integrity is the strongest asset a man can have. Everything else, the fame, the money, the houses, is just the side effect of choosing the hardest, most honest path. She was my anchor, and she allowed me to build without fear of falling apart." Phoebe, who handled the foundation's outreach, chimed in, "And Mom, you had the chance for the polished life. For Adrian's security. Why risk everything for a dream that felt impossible?" Elena smiled, remembering the cold elegance of Adrian's world and the warm reality of Daniel's. "Because true love isn't about choosing what's easy, Phoebe," Elena explained. "It's about choosing what's real." Adrian's life was an illusion of safety, built on a foundation of lies. Your father's life was difficult, but it was built on a bedrock of honor. My choice wasn't blind loyalty. It was the clearest choice I ever made. I chose a man who built things to last, and in doing so, we built a legacy that no amount of money could ever buy. The story of Daniel and Elena was also carried forward by the hundreds of students, apprentices, and young entrepreneurs who passed through the Anchor Build Foundation. At every foundation seminar, the same core lesson was taught. Anchor Build wasn't founded on a big loan. It was founded on an uncompromising ethical stance. The story of the broken fridge, the humble Anchor desk prototype, and the betrayal by Adrian and Thorne were used as teaching tools. One young builder, Mark, whose small, ethical contracting firm had received a foundational grant, often retold the story of Elena's vindication to his own apprentices. When you tempted to cut corners for a quick buck, Mark would say, "Remember Elena. Remember how the entire world told her she was a fool for choosing the man who was poor, injured, and struggling, over the man who was rich, powerful, and successful. The world applauds success, but it kneels to integrity." He'd talk about how Daniel's first public speech turned his disability into his greatest insight, and how Elena's quiet research exposed the rot behind the polished facade of their rival. "Their legacy isn't the size of their company," Mark concluded. "Their legacy is that they proved that the only truly successful life is the one built on unyielding faith, fierce resilience, and honest love." Years later, Maureen, now an elderly woman who beamed with pride at the mention of Daniel's name, often recounted the story to new acquaintances. She never glossed over her own initial skepticism. Her story became a public testament to the lessons she had learned, to value character over currency. The legacy of love was not just in their achievements. It was in the quiet, undeniable strength of their partnership. They had proved that the difficulties of the beginning were not a punishment, but the necessary forge for their success. Elena's original choice, the simple act of trusting the good heart of a flawed, struggling man, had created a ripple effect. It built a thriving business, fostered a family rooted in moral strength, and inspired an entire generation of ethical builders. Her love was the first, most crucial stone laid in the unshakable foundation of their enduring legacy. The final applause for Daniel and Elena was not the fleeting sound of a single standing ovation, but the constant, hopeful hum of a life built, against all odds, to last. If you enjoy this story, give this video a like, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a story that touches the heart.